When I was in grade school, one of the games that we would play at recess was Follow the Leader. It's a simple game, but in that game you have one leader and everyone else is a follower. The leader then navigates around the playground, leading the followers, and the followers' responsibility are to match the leader's exact movements. And if you don't follow exactly, then you're out. The last person that successfully follows the leader, they win the round and they get to become the next leader. So I have a distinct memory of this game. It was in maybe second or third grade, and one of my classmates was particularly adept at the monkey bars. And so every time she became the leader, she would head straight over to them. And that's because, as a second or third grader, our arms weren't long enough to be able to skip a rung. But she had long arms, and so she was able to skip the rungs. And she would go over there, and she would go down the monkey bars, skipping a rung every single time, smoothly, completely in control. And the rest of us, we would just watch helplessly, because we knew we were going to all have to go up and try to keep up, and all of us were going to fail miserably. And we did. We would fall, and because we all fell at the same spot, she got to be the leader again. It's a silly game, but unfortunately, that game reflects what is often an unhealthy approach to leadership in real life. The game, it assumes an us versus the leader mindset. I mean, think about this. The leader in that game is incentivized to drop followers. That's the goal of the game. It communicates that followers are expendable. Now, unfortunately, we can all probably think of situations where we've seen leaders act this way towards their followers. I worked in a warehouse when I was in college. It was a terrible job. I often felt like I was just a cog in the machine. The hours were terrible. The pay was terrible. And on top of that, I was on call. They would page me. I had a pager. And then I'd have to go in and I'd have to find stuff in the warehouse in the middle of the night. It was awful. There was constant turnover in the organization. Now, not every leader and not every organization or church is going to treat their employees as though they're expendable. But there are leaders who may expect their followers to just simply blindly follow. The leaders who just blaze ahead on the playground and they just assume that their followers are going to faithfully keep up. There are leaders who have a mindset that says, I'm doing it, so you should too, just keep up. The follow the leader mindset that comes from this game, it suggests that if someone isn't following well, they can just be replaced. This, of course, flies in the face of what we just discussed in the previous session. Leaders and followers share importance. So how do we address this tension or this challenge? Well, let's consider a biblical model. In John chapter 12, Jesus is surrounded by a crowd. And he normally is surrounded by crowds in the Gospels. But this time, the crowd is hostile to him. They refuse to believe in him. And I find this to be a bit surprising, because in the previous chapter, in chapter 11, Jesus just raised Lazarus from the dead. I mean, isn't that a statement about leadership? Even if you bring someone back to life, people will find something to disagree with you about. And they do. In John 12, verse 37, it says, even after Jesus had performed so many signs in their presence, they still would not believe in him. Now, I want us to consider how Jesus responds. Remember, this is the master teacher. He is the Messiah, the promised son of David. He's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Jesus is the leader of leaders. And look at what he does in response here in verses 49 and 50. He says, for I did not speak on my own, but the Father who sent me commanded me to say all that I have spoken. I know that his command leads to eternal life. So whatever I say is just what the Father has told me to say. Jesus' response is this: I just say whatever the Father says. Jesus, the ultimate leader, follows. He had the authority to perform miraculous signs and to heal. And he still, despite that, he still submitted himself to the will of the Father. And if Jesus can follow, then we should follow. Now, you might be thinking, I'm a leader. People follow me. And yes, you may be a leader, but just because you're a leader, that doesn't mean that you never follow at all. According to Robert Kelly, most people, however impressive their title or salary, spend more time working as followers than as leaders. The point is that everyone follows. Jesus follows the Father, and he models leadership that follows. So Jesus follows, and we also are followers. Now, you might be the youth pastor or the children's pastor. You lead your students, but you also follow your lead pastor. Lead pastors, you may lead your church, but you follow your district leadership. You have a board that you report to. We all follow the laws of our state and our country. We may lead in our home, but we also follow and honor our parents. And of course, ultimately, we all follow our Heavenly Father. This is important because Jesus' mindset of following influenced how he led his disciples. And we see this in Mark 10. In this chapter, two of Jesus' disciples, they ask for positions of power in the kingdom. And of course, this creates some tension with the rest of the 12. So to ease this, Jesus explains that the way of the kingdom does not consist of power grabs and hierarchical authority, but rather selflessness and sacrifice. It says this in verses 43 through 45. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. What Jesus says here is quite radical. We're used to this passage, and we've heard this before. But imagine hearing this for the first time as one of Jesus' disciples. You are under Roman occupation, and Rome exerts control through power. All you know is a top-down order to the world, and you long for the day when the Messiah will come and somehow overthrow your oppressors. And what Jesus says here, it flips everything on its head. He says, become a servant. In fact, he says, be a slave of everyone. How can Jesus say such a thing? How can he expect them to receive this? He can expect them to receive this and to do this because Jesus modeled this behavior. In John 12, which we just looked at, Jesus showed what following should look like. He practiced what he preaches. He leads by example. In Philippians chapter 2, it says that he did not use his position for his own advantage, but he used his position to benefit those who he led. Leading well starts with following well. And knowing what it's like to follow, what that does is it gives you perspective then on how to lead. Jesus could say to his disciples, you first must be slave to all, because he did it first. He came to serve. He modeled what he wanted from them. In the schoolyard game of follow the leader, the goal is to maintain your position by losing followers. As I said earlier, the game incentivizes bad leadership. You move around the playground trying to knock out your followers. In actual leadership, the goal should be to retain followers, not to lose them. Now, to use the illustration of the game, follow the leader, in our churches, the leader should navigate the playground, if you will, in a way that minimizes obstacles instead of maximizing them. As leaders, it's just as much our responsibility to bring people along as it is for our followers to keep up with us. It's both and. As leaders, we are responsible for bringing our followers along with us. And yes, they have a shared responsibility in keeping up, but it's both and. James Marousis discusses this in his chapter in the book, The Art of Followership. He writes about how the relationship between leaders and followers is like a dance. Leaders and followers need to constantly respond to each other and respond to the situations that the organization faces. And so to do this, they need to learn to think like each other and anticipate how each one will react. And so this idea of responding and reacting is essential. He writes, "The difference between response-able and responsible is the difference between something you can do and something you should do. Responsibility is readiness. Responsibility is abstract duty or job description. Leadership and followership are competencies that work in tandem as a shared discipline of reciprocal response abilities." In other words, leaders and followers move together as though they were dancing. They learn to anticipate and they work in tandem. I think this is an insightful way to frame this relationship. As we've observed, in our culture, we have an unbalanced perspective of leadership. We give leaders center stage. Followers are often relegated to the sidelines. It's because leaders give orders and followers are just expected to do what they're told. But what this author is saying is that the relationship needs to be much more robust than that. It shouldn't just be one-sided. Followers respond to leaders, yes, but leaders also need to respond to their followers. This is what it means to lead with the follower in mind. So how do we do this? In the first class, we said that everyone can lead. Now we're talking about how everyone follows. So does this mean that we need to get rid of org charts and titles? Of course not. No. Someone needs to be in charge ultimately. But if both leaders and followers play an important role, then we need to look to something outside of both of those in order to move forward. Gene Dixon explains this when he writes, "Followers and leaders both orbit around the purpose and values of the organization. Followers do not orbit around the leader." So I want to illustrate Dixon's comments here with a couple of images. In this first image, the follower orbits around the leader. The leader is the center of attention. He or she is the one that's calling the shots, and the follower is peripheral. This is how we traditionally view leadership. The leader is the weight or the gravity in the organization. Everything happens in relationship to the leader's direction. In the second image, the leader and follower interact in light of the organization's purpose and values. So in this model, the leader and follower work together. They are coexisting equals who share values and trust. I find this to be an extremely helpful way to think about my responsibility as a leader. My job isn't just simply to bark out commands, to make my staff do their work. No, instead, collectively, we have purpose and values that drive us as a team. Instead of expecting my staff to work for me, I need them to work with me. This is the dance that Marousas talked about. This requires open, honest, transparent communication. And as leaders, it's our responsibility to create space for our team members to be able to do this, to be able to express their questions and their concerns, to give feedback. This kind of vulnerability on the part of the leader builds trust with their followers. When feedback comes, when there is a response, leaders must actually listen and not dismiss it or just explain it away. We have to avoid viewing feedback as an attack. Ira Chaliff puts it this way. He says, "It is critical that leaders distinguish between challenge to their authority and challenge to their ideas." Actually doing this is going to prove difficult for many people, many leaders. And that's because this isn't modeled enough, even in the church. This kind of mindset, the ability to distinguish between challenge to authority and challenge to ideas, this requires a high level of trust, and that's only going to be developed over time. But leaders are responsible for creating trust. Yes, it is important that our followers earn trust. But at the same time, as people in charge, it's on us to create an environment of trust. So when one of our followers brings feedback to us, how we react to that matters. Our response is going to set the example, and it's going to establish culture. For example, if the person in charge downplays or ignores honest feedback, open communication in the future is going to suffer. We can improve this bottom-up communication by welcoming it when it occurs. And even more than that, instead of waiting for that feedback to come to us, we can actively seek it out, and that will build our team's confidence that we actually want it by going and asking specific questions. We need to cultivate a culture where we truly work with each other, and to use Marusis's language, we need to dance with our teams. And we do this when we keep the values and the mission at the center. So let's summarize a few of our ideas from this session. First, everybody follows, even Jesus. If Jesus, the ultimate leader, chose to follow, then we don't outgrow followership either. Instead, we are to grow in it. We follow because Jesus did. And leading with the follower in mind, it requires humility. Jesus modeled this for us. He followed the Father. He served his followers. That's because the biblical framework for leadership is service. Spiritual leaders put others first. The people they're leading, their congregations, their staff, they prioritize the needs of the group. They put others first, just like Jesus did. Now, this is a good point to bring up one of the challenges of leadership. We've talked about leadership and how we need to bring our followers along with us. We need to minimize the obstacles on the playground. But the reality is that there are times when we will have followers who just won't or can't keep up. And sometimes it's due to a lack of skill. Sometimes it's due to a lack of drive. Sometimes you don't just work as a team. And as leaders, sometimes we do have to make hard decisions. There are times when we need to let people go. But even in these moments where we make these decisions, or maybe especially when we make these decisions, we need to lead those moments with the follower in mind. Many years ago, I let one of our staff go. And I had spent time trying to develop the individual and work with them. And I was keeping my board up to date about the situation, but it just was not working out. And after I told the staff member about the decision, the individual took a day or two to process, and then he came back with a document. And it was a whole list of what he wanted us to do for him, to help him in the transition. He was young, and he meant well, but his request, it was just unreasonable. He went all out. And I wanted to honor him as best I could, so I brought what he had presented to the board. He wanted the board to look at it. And so I brought it to the board, and the board was not happy. They were like, okay, if he's going to have that attitude, tell him to clean out his desk, tell him to just leave. He can't be asking for this. And so I had a decision to make in that moment. I mean, I had spent months talking about how there were problems and challenges with this staff member to my board. I had, in a sense, been advocating to my board that we needed to make a transition. But in this moment, after the decision had made, after the conversation had taken place, I found myself now with a board that was ready to just, hey, get him out of here. But I found myself advocating for the staff member that I had just let go. I knew this young man had potential. I knew that if we didn't handle this transition well, it might short-circuit his future ministry. I had to lead with that follower in mind. Now, we didn't do all the things he asked, but we did some things. We took care of him, and he learned from that situation. And today, he is in a church doing well. He has a thriving ministry. And I don't want to take credit for that, but I know that I haven't always got it right. But I think in that moment, we did okay. And we set him up to be able to move forward, get his bearings, grow from the situation, and now he's in a wonderful place. Leading with your followers in mind is challenging. It requires humility and grace, but understanding what it means to follow fosters empathy in the leader, and it informs how they lead. In our next session, we'll start to look more closely at followership. Just as everyone follows, followers can also lead.